Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules to come and to be in community with our colleagues and with our students as we explore the topic of neurodiversity. Today, our session will focus and center the voices of our students. These are students who we interact with in our offices, students who are engaged in our programs, and they're in our classrooms. And so these are our students and their experiences that are going to frame our talk for today. We are very excited to have with us Dr. Meng-Chuan from the University of Toronto, who will be our keynote speaker this afternoon as well. But we're going to start off with our panel, and I would like to introduce the moderator, who will be Dr. Jonathan Regis, Associate Professor of Psychology, a member of the Institute for Autism Research, and co-director of the Aging and Autism Study. So with that, Dr. Regis.
So I'd like to introduce our student panel. These are an excellent cross-section of our university who represent a variety of majors here and areas they participate in. They're going to share some of their experiences and recommendations for us as staff and faculty and students, and really center the presentation today, as Spotty said. So first we have J.D. Green, who is an integrated marketing communication student. And I really appreciate in particular, in preparing for this, J.D. shared with us a lot about self-advocacy, and I hope he'll share that as a part of this talk. Next, we have Anna Barlow, who's a biology major and a student athlete and a member of the university swim team. So I'm really excited to hear Anna's perspective as well. And we have John Jones, who is a transfer student and a communications major who has participated in HEOP, the Alana Student Center, and the Office of Student Accessibility Services. I'm really excited to hear John's perspective, because in the 5 minutes I've known him so far, I want him to take my class. Thank you very much, students, and thank you, students, faculty, and staff for participating today. So the way that we're going to work this, the most important thing is for the student voice to be centered. So I'll ask a couple of questions. Our students will respond, share their experiences, and we'll build from there. So thank you all again for participating. I'd like to start with just telling us about your unique perspective and challenges and experiences. John, would you like to start us?
Sure. Hi, everybody. This is an honor to be here, and like you said, I transferred from ECC last semester with my associate's degree in international studies, and I also joined a community there, and some of the guys transferred here that's like familiar with, and I've took some good classes here that are doing real well in, and some of my professors is in the audience, so hopefully I'm doing real good and not too good at that. But my experience here last year, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what kind of classes I would have, but I know the expectations of professors of what their students want and how they perform to get out of their class and send it out to the world of how they want to be men and women after college outdoors. So I got a little bit of that from when I graduated at ECC, and some that still carry with me because I'm like and I'm gonna wrap this up a little bit because I was a learning disability student from local public school system up to high school and up to college, so I have to get a lot of things to be So every day I'm here, and I'm learning, and I'm doing the best I can. So.
Thank you. Anna, do you want to share your experience?
Good afternoon, everybody. So I am someone who struggles with processing information, so it just takes me a little bit longer to process things and understand it. And I struggle with, when I take notes, I struggle with trying to write everything down, but also processing it. So I'm just writing it down and I'm not processing it as well. In high school, I didn't really have much of an issue with it. I just had to have like extended time on tests, but that was about it. Like I didn't really find there was much else as far as like accommodations that I needed. And then when I came to college, I started having lectures that were much more dense with a lot more material, very quick pace. And so I realized that I was just falling behind in not like processing, being able to learn and understand all the information as quickly. And being a student athlete too, I didn't have as much time as I needed to process those things. So I worked with Sarah in the Student Accessibility Center, and I came up with some different ideas and plans to try to implement to help my learning and help me be able to process things and be able to do better in my classes.
Hi everyone, my name is JD Green. I'm born and raised in Clarence, which is about 30 minutes away from here. About 4th grade, my teachers, my parents, pretty much everyone around me started noticing that I had a processing disorder, and it kind of affects like your eyes, ears, and mouth. So any way that you are taking in information, I'm kind of comprehending it differently than the normal person. When I was in like 5th grade, I got a kind of a life coach, kind of an advocate for me. She kind of helped me to walk through the whole IEP process, the whole just understanding how to use your learning disability as a strength instead of weakness. And then when I got into college, I noticed that it was a lot easier for me to just go through my classes, go through my day-to-day work, because of the amount of help and resources I had going through. So I was extremely lucky for that. And I'll just keep it short because I'm sure you'll find out a lot more about that as we go through.
Thank you very much, students. So let's start on this side. JD, do you want to share a little bit about your experience with your self-advocacy?
So really, whenever I talk to someone that has any sort of learning disability, I really try to harp in on that. Make sure you're advocating for yourself, because going through the entire process, showing up to my IEP meetings with my parents, making sure I'm totally involved with understanding what my learning disability is what got me to the point I am today. Because I think there's a major issue nowadays with helicopter parents and those parents who kind of push their kids through high school, push their kids through middle school without them understanding why you have an IEP, what you're going to have to do in the future. And what happens is we see these kids come into college and they're just like dumbfounded, like, why don't I have my IEP anymore? Why don't I get my notes given to me by the teacher right away? And I think with myself being able to advocate so well to every single professor, I kind of just rip off the Band-Aid right away, which I think a lot of students are not comfortable doing that because they're afraid they might be profiled for their learning disability. And it's also a stigma that they've had throughout years, because if you think about it, you've had so many teachers, and there's always that chance that there's a teacher that says, well, I'm not going to give you these accommodations because it's just a disadvantage to the rest of the students in the class. So if you learn how to advocate for yourself, and I think that's everybody with a learning disability, without it, you'll be able to make it really far in life.
Anna, do you want to share about your experience with that?
So because I didn't really need very many accommodations in high school, I didn't really need to advocate for myself as much other than my extended time accommodations. So then coming to college, realized that I did need more accommodations, and I did need to talk to my professors more one-on-one. I was a little worried that maybe I'd be a burden to them, or I would just feel like they would compare me to other students and think, oh, other students don't need these accommodations, why should you? So when I had to talk to my professors about recording lectures to help me with audio processing and those kinds of things, I was always worried about that. But this semester, or this year especially, I was able to be better at self-advocating for myself, and I went to my professors and I talked with them and I explained it through with them why that helps me and why it would be beneficial to me. And so it just helped me feel a lot more better about myself and more confident in myself, and the fact that I was able to talk to them and be able to explain that.
John?
Yeah, I had to write some more stuff down, so it's something help me remember. So for me, going back to my years in Brooklyn public school, my dream was to go to college and be like everyone else, just like my friends do. So, I said, okay, cool. And then I had a meeting with the board of education. Okay, so they told me that in order to get to college, you need to get a GED or you complete 4 more years of high school. I said, okay, I just gonna do 2 more years of that, so that way I can get my IEP, then go to the adult education system. Even though that took me a long time, so and I was trying to figure why I'm not seeing progress. So I said okay. I got my mom told me, remember you had seizures at the age of 5 and messed up your reading and your comprehension. I said you know what? Yes, let me just do a psych eval and then get the accommodations that I needed. So once I got that, I was making progress, and I had to do everything for myself to say I can do this. I don't see my learning disability as a weakness. It's like JD said, you got to use it as a strength. So I finally used it as a strength, and then once I put it inside classes, so I got to make sure that you know what, I gotta let these professors know that say I'm this student, I don't want to be treated as such. I just when it comes to quizzes and exams, I just need time. That's all. So I'm happy I got time. I'm happy I got professors that are understandable versus those that doesn't. So that's why I would like to have more professors that have a better understanding for there are students that need more time and they need more understanding that you got their backs and not discouraging them and not saying that this is a disadvantage for a subject that you try to pass or pass a class. So with that, I should say just keep on encouraging them, say that they can do this. If they, I know some of them that I'm working with, they got office hours, and I meet them in the office hours, and I don't want to put her on blast, but she's sitting down. But Dr. Snyder, she's really awesome with that. So and every class that I took her with, she's very understandable. She's up and she took that psych course, and now she's here. So I'm glad that she's here. So and I love her for that. So. And also Professor Mayer as well.
So how about the others so John shared some specific things about communicating and professors to talk to. Anna, do you have any perspectives on specifically communicating successfully with professors?
Yes, so this year I discovered that audio recording the lectures is a really useful tool for me so that I can, since I cannot write and process as fast during class, and my lectures being a bio major are very dense with a lot of information, that way I could go back and re-listen to the lectures and get all of the information that I missed. So that for me is what I found was helpful, so I had to communicate that to my first brought it up, some of my professors kind of were questioning it and weren't totally on board or like understanding it. But then I was able to talk with them more and explain how it could help, and they ended up realizing that it could really be beneficial to me, and so communicating that is what helped me get what I need to do better in the class, and them to understand how I learn differently and how everybody learns differently, and there's different things that work for others and might not work for other people.
Thank you. JD?
For me, I would say, again, just rip off the Band-Aid, which is really easy for me, but I think a lot of kids with learning disabilities, it's not as easy for them to create that bond with a professor as soon as they meet them. And by the time that bond is created, it could be the end of semester, because our semesters move so fast. It's not as the same as high school, where you have your teachers moving with you through an entire year. So I think it's really up to the faculty and staff to kind of harbor a good, open environment where any student can come to you and feel like, hey, I had this problem. What can we do to work around it and work with that problem so that it's not hindering my learning? Because I think a lot of the issues can happen where there's a teacher and they have been set in their ways for a while, and it's that same learning over and over and over again. You have a kid come in and they're learning a totally different way. Just as humans in general, I think we have a big issue with kind of change because we feel uncomfortable with it. So if you go up to a professor and you say, look, the way you're teaching is not helping me at all, you might get a little pushback in the beginning, but I think it's up to our faculty and staff to understand that, hey, they're not judging you, they're just trying to make sure they're getting the information that they need so that the class is successful for them.
Excellent. I really like that point. I think John or Anna, do you want to follow up on that? Sometimes feeling like you have to defend your needs for accommodations can be really stressful. Can you share some more about that?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned it before. Feeling like you have to defend your needs, you kind of feel like that extra stress and pressure, and you don't know if your professors will understand or accept that and respect that, and you might feel like, oh, I'm feeling like I'm being a burden to them, or they just think that, like I'm just like trying to be a pain and all of that. So I definitely think that it is a stress, and it is kind of stressful if you don't know how they're going to respond to that. So like JP said, professors who seem more open and willing to work with you definitely make me feel a lot more comfortable about going to them, approaching them, and discussing this with them. But if they kind of seem like they're stuck in their ways, or they're not really susceptible to change, that is when I normally feel maybe a little bit of stress having to go to them.
For me, I would say it's like JP said, when it comes to the professors are open and understanding, you can just tell them, for me, I found it when it's on that first day, the first day of the semester, the first day of class, that's when you know the structure of your professor and how they structured their learning throughout the semester. So, and I would say I would say for me that first day is important. You can straight up tell your professor I'm the one that do got this learning disability, and are you willing to work with me as I also put in the work with you as well along with my colleagues. So I'm working twice as hard just as everyone else, because I'm facing myself versus everyone. So that's how I see it every day when I look at class. It's me versus me, not me versus everyone. So and I'm happy that I'm part of programs that's here, like the HEOP, the Alumni Center, and also the Student Accessibility Program, because without those three, I would not be who I am today. So and I'm glad and thankful and humble that I got that help, that actual push.
And I think also, as long as we're kind of talking about this, we've kind of talked about it before we were in front of you guys, but I think it would be great for maybe faculty and staff to have kind of a mandatory training where, like, more than Sierra and Angela telling what the accommodations are, but I think there's another aspect where the faculty and staff have to understand what these learning disabilities are and how it's affecting the student. Because without understanding that, you're not going to be able to see the student struggling in your class. You're not going to be able to understand, hey, why is this student coming up to me? So that'd be so beneficial for so many students on campus.
Yeah. And I was going to say as well, like, topped off with that, they also, like, with those two, like, they are our second voices, like, when it comes to, like, the faculty and staff, when it comes to, like, a staff meeting, while we're on break. So like it'll be cool like if they did have that training because that would be like an extra relief from us as well. So like for me, you just spoke about it. Like I do got ID, and I had to get a high school literacy along prior along with that. So I've been through the process, and what Anna said, like when it comes to like some classes, like I gotta record it, like because like if I can't write down fast, like I said, you know what, let me record this, and then I'll look at it and say like, okay, boom, I got that information in the bank.
So what about, so you're talking about additional stressors, about defense, about advocacy. Can you put that in the context of mental health? How do those things potentially challenge mental health?
I'll start with this one. So I think a lot of the times what can happen, just from my own experience, is when someone has a processing disorder, when someone has any sort of issue that they feel kind of like the out kid, or why am I not getting the material that's being taught, the brain just kind of shuts down. And instantly that student kind of feels like, well, hey, if I'm not understanding it now, when will I ever? And why don't I just be quiet in class, don't say anything, or why don't I just not show up to class? And I think a lot of the times, even as students, if you don't see the person sitting next to you show up, a lot of times you're like, well, they just don't want to learn. But that could be a mental health issue because they are so overwhelmed, they're so stressed, that they just don't want to put themselves through that.
Yeah, so I would agree that it is very taxing on your mental health at times. If you do feel like you're not getting the support you need, or if faculty and staff or even your peers aren't understanding how you learn and how your brain works, it's kind of difficult because you feel like you're kind of alone at times, and that can lead to you feeling overwhelmed, and like JD was saying, you might start to feel like I can't do this and that kind of thing, or like I'm not getting the help I need, so it just becomes much more difficult for you. Something that might be super easy for someone else.
I would say discouragement also relates to the mental health, to what both of them has said, like you don't get like that extra help, and they missing in class. Like somebody looked up and noticed like where's so and so, like saying oh, like this is home or not feeling well, but like I would say like this discouragement process of it, saying like if somebody is not getting that support is right.
And I just want to follow up with what they both said because it gave me a little thing to think about. I recently was taking a class with Professor Fortunato, and it was about interpersonal communication.
I love her.
Yeah, right? And I think that it's definitely available for students to take, but we don't see it in our core, like you have to take this class. And if students with learning disabilities or without it knew to take that class, it would help them immensely through their college career, especially if they took it freshman year, because it's teaching you how to create bonds with people. It's teaching you how to develop a relationship in a healthy way. And that way you feel comfortable and you feel that your mental health is being considered by the person across from you. So, yeah.
So it sounds like many of you are describing or would advocate for more programming for both students and staff and faculty about neurodiversity and how impactful it can be and how we can work with it. I'm really glad to hear that. Can you share some final thoughts and recommendations for how we go forward even beyond that?
I think, totally for my final thoughts, I think that we really need to harp in on the aspect of being a student and creating a community, because without that community, without people backing you up, you kind of can feel like you're just out here floating in the middle of nowhere. And especially with a kid who's having struggle in class and outside of class, you're just going to shut down and you're not going to have a successful college career. So I think that it's really important that we start trying to incorporate these aspects of just general life into our learning instead of just focusing on your main course material that has been taught for years.
So I think it would be very important for professors and peers to have just a better understanding that not everyone is the same, not everyone thinks the same, not everyone processes information the same. So one thing that could work for someone might not work for someone else. So I think just the acceptance and even the expression by the faculty that they're willing to work with you and that they understand that not everyone learns the same way is really beneficial, and like we touched on before, that would make a student feel more comfortable going to that faculty or staff member and talking through what they need with them, and it would just do a lot more for that student's mental health and for how they are learning and how they do well in their class.
I said everything I was saying. All I have to say is like just encourage everyone. So like encourage that student, see like if that professor knows that that student is struggling, like just have that student say like let me talk with you and say like later, so like it's like and like when it comes to that one-on-one thing, like that student will be very encouraging to nail that subject and get that A, and it is on her class. So just encouragement. So.
Thank you so much, students, for sharing your experiences, for sharing your recommendations, and your perspectives. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I'm sure everyone really appreciated hearing that. I look forward to our next talk.
Before I introduce our speaker, are there any questions for our student panelists? Okay. All right. Thank you. So my colleague Maggie often reminds me that I need to introduce myself. I just assume people know who I am. I just assume people know Miss Fatima, right? So my name is Fatima Rodriguez Johnson. I serve as the Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion here at Canisius University. And I am honored to introduce our presenter. Meng-Chuan is a staff psychiatrist and senior scientist at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto. He's an associate professor and co-chair of the Advisory Council for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, Indigeneity, and Accessibility in Clinical Care in the Department of Psychiatry. He is also a graduate faculty at the Institute of Medical Science and Department of Psychology for the University of Toronto. He is an honorary visiting fellow at the Department of Psychology, University of Cambridge, and an adjunct associate professor and attending psychiatrist at the National Taiwan University Hospital. He is an International Society of Autism Research Fellow and an editor of the Journals of Autism and Molecular Autism. Dr. Lai received his MD from the National Taiwan University and completed psychiatry residency as well as child and adolescent psychiatry subspecialty training at the National Taiwan University Hospital. He holds a PhD in psychiatry and neuroscience from the University of Cambridge, where he also conducted his postdoctoral research in autism neuroscience. Can y'all say he know a lot? He know a lot. We're so pleased that he's here with us, and with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Lai.
Thank you so much, Fatima. I have to remember cutting down the bio next time. It's so embarrassing. It's a great honor to be here, and thank you all for being here. I just want to say that, please feel free to move around. If you want to stand up, you want to grab some water, just feel free to. And thanks for accommodating me. I just ran to the washroom before coming here because I'm too nervous. So it's really great to be here, and especially hearing from JD and John and Anna about your experiences. And I think I'm hoping to tie things into what I'm going to present later on, though I'm demonstrating the way you shouldn't do it, because first of all, I didn't share my slides beforehand. Secondly, some of the slides are actually quite text heavy. Third, the contrast of the color may not be the best. However, I'm happy to share the slides afterwards, so I hope that will compensate for some of the accessibility issue that we may be having here. All right, so I want to start here not exactly from the angle of learning disability, but more from the other condition that's part of neurodivergence, which is autism. So this is a note that was written to describe a child at the first few years of his age. And I wouldn't read it out. I'm hoping that you could actually get the gist of that. This is the child who has been described in the English literature about almost 80 years ago as the first child who has been formally clinically recognized as being autistic. And this is a case note from Dr. Lee O'Connor, who arguably was the first person describing autism as a condition in the English literature. And as you can see, the way things are described are behavior descriptions. And if you think about the description here, it's not all about symptoms. It's not all about deficits. It's not all about something this child has to change. You can see fair neutral description about how the child interacted with the physical versus the social world. You also see a description about cognition, for example, like the excellent memory that the child had at the time. Arguably, these could be considered as deficits or impairments. And this is the first publication that was published in English literature, and you can see in the journal, there's like section title and like very clear pathology, right? That's how it was called, like more than about a century ago. And this condition was back then called autistic disturbances of affective contact. So it's basically describing autism as a condition characterized by emotional contact, or the pattern of emotional contact observed by other people. Now, this is a selection, right? You select that characteristics as describing autism as the core, but there are also other features that was already recognized, just not put in the forefront or at the center of the state, defining the difference of the person. For example, memory. For example, sensory features. For example, cognitive potential, and so on. At the same time, just want to bring our attention to Gloria Sharapovalova, who was a Russian pediatrician and who described similar descriptions for children who are different at the time. And this was actually described as for a 14-year-old girl. And some of you might know, neurodivergence, autism, ADHD, learning disability was described as being more often occurring in people who are assigned male at birth. So there would be a lot of stereotype that maybe it's less likely for girls, women, individuals assigned as female at birth to have those conditions. But things have been described, about a century ago already. So as you can see, hopefully you can see from the case, from the notes that was described, of course there were descriptions about difficulties, but there were also descriptions about how this child interacted with the social world. Some of them may be interpreted as oppositional. So she answered, I don't want to, I'm not doing it. But there's also a lot of emotional reactions that attach to that. And the reason I highlighted these is that the kind of differences and the reaction to how the person was treated was already presented and known to the clinical the clinicians basically at large over about 80 years ago. Another example here was arguably the first description of what we know as ADHD nowadays. Exactly, this is not the kind of definition for ADHD now, but this is how they were formulated actually for now, like over a century ago by George Steele, a pediatrician in the UK. And as you can see, the way this kind of behavior pattern was described were very much morally driven, right? So essentially, this is a bad kid type of lack of moral control. But that was like the kind of language and understanding used at the time to understand differences. The reason I want to bring us back to this historical account was that many of the conditions that we now understand as part of neurodivergence, or based on the clinical manual called neurodevelopmental disorders, were defined initially in the medical realm, which essentially characterized by symptoms that caused impairment that needs to be treated. That's the basic model. And there's, to be honest, it's understandable why that model is, because that's exactly what medicine does, right? You identify something as a prototype, then you try to treat it, for the benefit of the person. But things aren't that clear cut in the medical or clinical realm, because yes, some conditions like infection, COVID, or depression, PTSD, things like that, many of them definitely themselves need a lot of support and treatment because it's actually very difficult for the person to go through that. Some of these definitions or conditions defined by the medical literature actually was describing differences among the population. They will produce difficulties, supposedly, because of the condition themselves, and or how people are treated and how the environments are, designed to be matched to the need of the person. So that brings us to the concept of neurodiversity, and I really highly recommend people take a look at Nick Walker's work. So if you just Google neuroqueer.com, you will see Nick Walker's very fantastic description about the updated concept of neurodiversity. So she is a philosopher and also autistic herself. In general, the idea of neurodiversity is quite similar to biodiversity that we know. It's describing the collective. It's not describing a single person. It's describing the differences that's existing as a biological fact, in our world. And the paradigm that cherishes neurodiversity is itself a political movement. It is something that's highlighting the value and the forgotten nature of neurodiversity for the common good of the population. And the term neurodivergent is used to describe people who are what we call neurominority, so who process the information from the world not exactly the same as the majority of individuals, which is usually termed as neurotypical. So neurodiversity itself is not referring to a single person, it's referring to the collective differences across our population. And this is how Nick Walker described the neurodiversity paradigm. It's a natural and valuable form of human diversity, and it also challenges the idea of normal. And we do know there's a statistical normal across different dimensions, and there's not only one dimension describing human behavior, right? So there are actually multiple dimensions of what we call a distribution of characteristics. But very often, and we know that that people try to, or very, very commonly assign value to the distribution. So if you are in the middle, or you're above the middle, then you are better. If you're less, then you're less, right? So that's a human say, convention. It's not saying that it's right. It probably isn't, but that's what happened. So understanding the differences and the distribution across different traits does exist, and the value of cherishing those differences is the core of neurodiversity paradigm. So it challenges the idea that you only have to be one way to be right and good. And that's why it is a political movement. The neurodiversity paradigm also highlights the tension to the social dynamics, and for the very reason that although in the medical literature, many of these features are characterized as symptoms attached to a person, so the person needs to change, neurodiversity paradigm highlights that, well, the well-being or the function and the function of the person is dependent not only on the person themselves, but also on how things are crafted and arranged. And I think that's exactly what John and Anna and JD has highlighted, right? The value of recognizing the differences and trying to match the learning environment and other environment to the person's characteristics. So this is a slide taken from Dr. Sue Fletcher-Watson in the University of Edinburgh, and I have her permission to use these slides, and she's a fantastic scholar producing a lot of materials for education. But the essential idea is that neurodiversity is, represented by this analogy that you have lots of different trees, and they're all trees. There's no good or bad trees. They're there, and this condition or this phenomenon itself is of value. So diversity itself is actually of great value. Now, there are quite a few misunderstandings when people talk about neurodiversity or neurodiversity movement or paradigm. So the first idea, this is a synonym used in the UK context. So basically stands for special education need and disability. So essentially that's the disability-related context in education settings. So in many cases that people may equate neurodiversity to a special needs itself. And Sue argued that there's a risk of you changed language, but you didn't really change the action. You didn't really change your value system, right? And then you still, reinforce the stigma that's originally attached to being special. And I think many of our panelists actually spoke about that fear of, if I share with others I had this need, I reinforce the stigma that's there, and that's probably not good. So that actually stopped a lot of students from coming forward to ask for help, and that also prevents from the staff or professors from knowing like the differences, that of the students, and then the needs to adjust things. So it is important to understand that neurodiversity paradigm actually is helpful for us to rethink how and why things are done in school and in educational settings. It basically challenges us, is it really that we have only one way of evaluating student performance? Is it really that we only have one way that makes sure things go smoothly in the classroom? It's challenging our thinking about what are the possibilities. The other common misconception is that neurodiversity movement, or examples used to illustrate this, often included a lot of emphasis on strength, and understandably, that's used to to fight against the stigma. However, it might brought into this impression that you need to be excellent in something else for you to be neurodivergent, which is not the case, right? So there's a risk of putting additional pressure on neurodivergent individuals that they need to excel on something. If you're autistic, you have to be very good in math. You have to be an astrophysicist, which is not the case. There are autistic people who are very poor with math, who are excellent with humanities and art, right? So there's this risk of stereotyping. Again, we know in the DEI space, it's a big issue, and it applied here as well. and risks emphasizing on the individual rather than the collective, which is the diversity itself. So neurodiversity actually reminds us that diversity itself is a strength. The fact that there is diversity in learning, in processing, in behaviors, in actions, in ways responding to the world and changing the world itself is a strength. And there is another misconception that neurodiversity paradigm rejects the concept of disability and use another term to describe it. And this is a misconception because neurodiversity paradigm actually embraces disability. And being disabled is not something that's shameful. Being disabled described the situation of a person in a particular context, and the disability comes from the interaction of the person and the context/environment. And that is really what neurodiversity is trying to argue, because if you recognize that disability is a product of the individual differences and also the contextual factors, then it provides you the opportunity to look at, okay, so what can be done with the environment, as well as what can be done for the individual to reduce the level of disability. So I just want to refer back to JD's example of taking off the Band-Aid and advocate for yourself. Because self-advocacy requires the person to stand up and say something, right? So that is something that needs to be fostered and cultivated and supported of the individual. You also need the context to support the student to take action for the very first step. So you need that scaffold for that to happen. So that's the essence of neurodiversity. It's actually focusing on both the context and the individual factors. And I think that's really well articulated. Sorry for the impossibility to read this table. I share the table with you. But essentially, it's debunking the idea that there's this polarized idea of only medical model or only social model of disability. If you take the only medical model idea, like everything could be attributed to the person's defect, so that needs to be changed. That's one pole. The other pole would be like the very strong view of social disability, a social model of disability, which is like, it's all the fault of the system, right? So you have to change everything in the system. Sometimes that's not totally feasible for a range of practical considerations. But neurodiversity paradigm provides this space for harmonization of these two. It takes into account the interaction of the two and the function of the person as a product of individual functioning and what you can do with the environment. So it provides the space for us to think about and be creative about what can be done to support the person. So I just want to highlight that point a little bit. Now, I'm tasked to talk a bit about mental health challenges, and I will be brief. I know I'm halfway through. This is just a figure illustration about the prevalence rates of different mental health conditions in people who have autism diagnosis. So it's just an example to illustrate that people who have autism diagnosis, just an example, often have other neurodevelopmental diagnoses, but they very much so have lots of psychiatric conditions. So for example, meta-analysis shows the prevalence rates of anxiety disorders across the board, could be at the very least 20-ish%. And the same applied to depression. The same applied to either other more severe mental illnesses, for example, bipolar disorder or either schizophrenia. And these are just a reminder to us that there could be a range of different reasons contributing to these elevated rates of mental health conditions. And I will talk about that actually right at this moment. So we don't know exactly why, right? We don't know exactly why this happens, but there could be multiple possibilities. And again, sorry for the impossibility to read this one, but just to highlight the idea of this diagram is that if you have some neurodevelopmental diagnosis like neurodivergence, there could be a range of contributing factors for you to have elevated mental health challenges. And I sort of like categorize them into different domains. So the green ones are basically something more biological, So we do know from a lot of biological studies that it could be the genetic background, it could be some early environmental factors that contributes to both, right? And to be honest, there's quite little you can do with that at the moment. But let's pay attention to the yellow and the red ones. So the red ones is basically highlighting social contextual determinants. And we do know, actually we know quite a lot, that individuals who have neurodevelopmental diagnosis tend to experience more stigma than other people, tend to be misunderstood more often compared to other people who do not have neurodevelopmental diagnosis. And we do know these kind of stigmatization and even being misunderstood for the long term themselves are risk factors for anxiety, for stress-related conditions, including PTSD, and then including substance use to self-medicate, to soothe themselves, which could actually further down the road elevate the risk of severe mental illness that's associated with substance misuse, for example, psychotic disorders or bipolar disorders. So there could be some cascading effect based on how a person copes effectively or not so effectively. There's also this important cognitive factors, which I think our panelists had actually talked about: processing speed, how you interpret social informations, how flexible you are in thinking, in thinking and experiencing things, how likely you tend to ruminate and being sticky on certain experiences you had in the past. And these are all part of different process of coping with different experiences one may have. So considering these factors would be helpful for helping professionals. For example, I understand there could be clinicians and helping professionals in the audience. This diagram was created with that audience in mind. Basically, this provides a framework to think about what might be the contributing factors for the person in front of myself experiencing mental health challenges at the time. So there are biological factors, there could be social contextual factors, there could be adverse life experiences I didn't mention. For example, getting bullied is a big thing.
Yeah.
So this is again Dr. Sue Fletcher-Watson's slides, but I think it's really helpful to use them as a summary for lots of things that we talked about so far. So we do have to expect diversity is there, although currently it's this is status quo in the UK, but I don't think that's too different across the rest of the world. There's this convention that if you have a condition, you require specialist support for you. And then there's a lot of challenge to meet normative curriculum target. And Sue's suggestion is that for the future, there should be individualized learning baked into the education and also systematic change. And what we can do is to draw on the expertise of neurodivergent educators and learners themselves, because that's actually one important thing. If we know how people learn differently, then we can actually create different ways of learning based on people who have learned differently, right? But if we don't know how people learn differently, there's no way to create different ways of learning. If we just rely on what we conventionally, what we used to do in the past. And then this is mainly for the school, so there's like child-centered approach. And but I think this is less of an issue in the college context, but maybe at some point still so. Sometimes people tailor things to a diagnosis. You have to have a diagnosis for you to get certain support. But we do know quite well in our sphere that the accommodation and needs are actually quite individualized. They should be individualized. Two individuals has the same diagnosis may not necessarily need the same accommodation. Two different people who have different diagnoses may actually need the same accommodation. For example, if they both need more time to process information, they need more time, period. Right, so, and this is just one example that I think is really telling that, in the school setting, sometimes people have some issues identified, so they are brought into this pathway for a diagnosis assessment, which will take 3 years to complete. But they may actually just be a very, not simple, but straightforward way to respect, understand the child's need, and then provide the support that could prevent a lot of difficulties down the road. And also, we can skip this one, sorry. Self-advocacy skill is another thing that has been really highlighted, and coming back to the point that our panelist has mentioned about, because it's not something, think about how we learn to speak, right? So we learn to speak up, and how we learn to advocate for ourselves through a series of actions. Like, none of these are very simple skills. We need people who support, understand us, to build it for us. So some people are lucky that they have a natural scaffold out there for them, so they develop these skills. Some people would really make use of scaffolds that's deliberately offered for people to have all those skills. So self-advocacy is really one key for us to, as an educational institute, and actually in a larger society, to support people to develop more skills. Okay, so really emphasize on the universality of needs, and also create an environment where it is okay to ask for help and to receive it. Okay, and there is also this need of recognizing how stigma plays a role in stopping people from asking for help and in stopping people from getting access to things that can help their well-being and learning. So there needs to be really a continuous effort for systematic changes and investment in schools and the larger places to create an anti-stigma environment in the classroom and beyond. Okay, so I think this is really the key figure from Sue's proposal, which I borrow. I think it's really useful. A neurodiversity affirmative institutional setting is really highlighted by, we expect diversity to be present as the nature of our environment. We need to teach self-advocacy skills. We need to fight stigma, and we need to support individuals rather than labels. And for the final few minutes, I just want to bring us back to some more clinically relevant examples, or practically relevant examples that has already implemented all these. For people who are clinicians or working in the field of autism, this will be familiar with you. This is a structured teaching program that has been used in the field for decades. In the schools, has been used about how you use visual cues, how you use structured environment to facilitate the learning of the child, which we take this for granted in most cases, that this is helpful, and why not apply the same philosophy to other educational settings as well, if we know these are the contexts that can actually support different ways of learning. And again, sorry, another impossible slides to read, but this is a nice illustration of how assessments in the neuropsychological testing realm can be amended to help individuals to achieve their assessments in a more equitable way. So, for example, for interviews, job interviews or other interviews, you offer to give many interview questions in advance so people can process that, not on the spot. And ability to change the font size or background color of pre-reading materials, because again, people may actually need those changes for them to be, for the content actually to be eligible to individuals. And managing sensory environments, and sometimes people who have sensory sensitivities to noise, to light, bright light, especially to smell, and those things definitely can be adjusted and should be adjusted, arguably, for the learning to be more successful. Some of you might already know this idea of universal design, which is coming from originally the architecture literature. And the idea, Jen, is that something that's designed for people, that's equitable for everyone to use, is flexible. You have different ways of achieving that. It's intuitive, so you don't have to know a lot to use it. And it's tolerate errors, and it provides less physical effort. So there is a curriculum that has been created for neurodivergent individuals, and this is basically tested from the Weissman paper 2023 published in Autism. I did provide the link here. I'll provide the slides so you can actually download that. And this study actually assesses the effect, the feasibility, and the acceptability of this curriculum in higher education settings. And this is a slide that they provided as online education modules for post-secondary educators. So as you can see, this is a slide talking about how you can use universal design to help diverse students. You prepare course materials early beforehand. You state clearly in your syllabus about the different ways or different forms of diversity that are valued in your class, and understand people learn differently, and use and explain why you use multiple types of assessment. Again, there's no one way of achieving the course goals. That you could design a few different ways to achieve the goal, or individualized way of achieving the goals, and provide very clear guidelines and expectations, and teach using multiple modalities: visual support, handouts, key points, activities, limit lectures, like limit what I'm doing right now. Multiple ways of students to demonstrate their capability, which I think is really something that's creative and is helpful. There's no only one way you can demonstrate that you have learned successfully. And encourage one-on-one, which I think I've heard also from our panelists, that could be very helpful to help the educators to understand one's needs and learning profiles, providing information about how the student can access support. Another example here is peer support. So this is just an example of it's actually created by our center in Toronto. A group of autistic youth came together to talk about how they feel would be helpful in coping with emotional challenges related to depression, for example. So this is actually the tip sheet coming out of that project. So it's a used to use peer-to-peer educational materials about self-help. And we do find like this is really helpful because it's from actual experiences. It's complementary to professional clinical suggestions, and I think this has been demonstrated in many spheres that peer support is one of the key ingredients of successful support. Now, to sum up, I'm just giving this slide as maybe more so for mental health professionals and supporters and clinicians in the audience. If we think about the training of counselors, psychologists, physicians, we learned about humanistic approach. I still remember the first time learning about Carl Rogers, like the humanistic approach in my college years, which is a while ago, and how strongly I feel that resonates, right? So as helping professionals, that's something that we all embrace, and I think our panelists also highlight that, like that kind of like you're being valued as a student with differences, and how powerful that can be. That applied well, like very well, to neurodivergent populations, right? Helping professionals, clinicians are well prepared and trained to understand differences of individuals, to understand, to provide empathy itself as a way of communication, as a way of helping as well. And I think mental health professionals are really well equipped to learn and understand differences in processing, just applying that to neurodivergent populations. And also, I think clinicians learn about so-called biopsychosocial formulation, right? You're trying to make sense of why this person has experienced these challenges and difficulties, and we individualize that. That's essentially precision medicine, like the very, very, very sexy word that people use nowadays. But that's essentially individualized, right? So we already, like helping professionals already have that ideas in mind. So a neurodiversity-affirming approach is basically compatible with humanistic approach as well as biopsychosocial formulation. I just want to bring this up to very clearly, because I think this is what we already have, and this is readily applicable. I'll skip this one. You'll have it, and there's a paper that if you are interested, you can read it. I want to bring us back to this story, and you can actually look this up. This is BBC News, but there's actually a PBS documentary last year already. It's called In a Different Key. So if you remember the first child I presented, like the description of this 5-year-old boy, Don Triplett was the first person who was described autistic. And then after that, no one knows like where he is. Until about a decade ago, Donovan and Zucker, like two journalists, went to Mississippi, went to Don Triplett's hometown, and trying to understand and figure out where he is. And they figured out that he lived very well in the community. So he was the kid that was described as like having no interest to people, people coming and just ignore them, just go straight to the toys, and he was actually institutionalized for a while at the moment. He was well accepted in the community. He finished high school. He went to college. He studied French and I think math. He worked later on as a teller in a bank owned by his family, so that worked well. He did have routines, still had routines. He still had a lot of like stereotypical speech. He went to pubs regularly, interact with people regularly, although the conversation wouldn't be elaborative, but good enough. He went for travel regularly every year. He was able to drive. He went to golfing. And he lived until I think close to 90-year-old. So I think he passed away last year or two. And this is a quote from the description. The most unusual thing about Donald's experiences at Forest High in the early 50s was how his fellow students, their families, and the school community treated him. This eccentric teenager who had disappeared from school for so many years with institutionalization. They simply let him be. And then, just one story, the two journalists went into this community trying to understand where he was, and they were warned by the community members for many times. And the community members basically said that, if you figure out you're doing something malicious to Don, that we'll track you down. It takes a village, right? It takes a village. And I have this sense that Canisius is a village, right? So, yeah, thank you.
So Dr. Lai is available. We have about 20 minutes. He'll take questions. We will get the mic to you so that you can ask him anything that you feel is important for you based on maybe what you heard from our students and also what you heard from Dr. Lai. Any questions?
Students, if you all need to get to your next class, it's okay.
So this is a question about students growing up in the school system with developmental or learning disabilities. I wanted to know what you think about taking those students and having them in classroom settings where they're separate from their other students, because what I find in these sorts of settings is that rather than helping them engage with their peers, what this ends up doing is creating more of a stigma in creating a very obvious divide between neurotypical and neurodivergent students growing up. And I wanted to know if you would advocate for doing something differently to prevent that from happening.
Thank you. Can everyone hear the question?
Yeah.
Good. Okay. So yeah, first of all, I think there may not be only one way that's correct to do this, right? So we do know from special education system or education system in general that there's a reason why some classes are arranged for a smaller group of students. Now, we also know that a lot of education settings do emphasize integration because that's basically helpful for both sides, right? And I think I'm actually not an educator in the school system, so I understand there are lots of feasibility and practical considerations that result in why things they are at the moment. I agree from a clinical and philosophical perspective. I do think both are needed. So it's subject or context dependent, right? So for example, if the pace of a larger classroom is just too quick for the student, then a smaller classroom would really be needed. But there could be a range of other contexts that there's no reason why you would have a divide in terms of differences. So I think that's subject dependent. Now, what I wouldn't agree would be in some systems, they may have this almost like diagnosis dictated type of arrangement. If you have autism diagnosis, you'll be in autism classroom. And you're in autism classroom with people who have quite divergent ways of learning and differences. And that, I don't think that would be an effective way. So I think coming back to the idea we talk about individualization, I think moving away from diagnosis label dictating like the downstream things back to individualized approach would be helpful. This is a bit of a utopian thinking, I understand. It could practically be challenging.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing this. I noticed one of the slides with the recommendations around self-advocacy had two words that really stuck out to me, and that was believing them, right? So as we ask students and we give students the skills to self-advocate, we also need to ask our teams to believe them. And I've heard students express doubt, and I've heard faculty and staff express doubt. How can we help build confidence, respect, and understanding and trust? How do we create that space of trust? I know we were talking earlier today about how do we bring in, many of us have had this conversation many times, how do we bring people into the rooms to learn and to build that trust and understanding?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. Okay, so first of all, I think there should be some consensus of how we think about human beings, right? So that could be a product of how we were brought up and what our value systems were constructed and what kind of value system we're following, I mean, especially in a capitalist society. I think the key point there is that it's a matter of belief. At the end of the day, it's a matter of belief, right? So the reason I refer back to Carl Rogers is that, if you think about how he approaches his relationships with clients, that there's this unconditional, that's the term, like unconditional. So that's basically representing the belief itself. So it is a basic stance of approach, and I do think that is of value. I still think it's of value. Now, more practically speaking, Jonathan and I were talking about, and Jen as well, we were talking about this, right? So many of the neurodivergence or the divergence conditions was historically linked to neurodevelopmental diagnosis, which are clinical diagnoses, which are historically linked to the behavior observation of the parent, as well as the behavior observation of the clinicians, right? So everything relies on externally observable behaviors. Now, that's why so much of neurodivergence, learning disability included, actually maybe at most, that people don't believe you because they don't see it. And there's a misunderstanding there, because there's a misunderstanding, sorry for criticizing this in the US, but like behavior approach has this limitation. I mean, behavior approach observes behaviors. It doesn't observe everything. Right, and I totally get why we need observable metric for measurement, for understanding. That's the whole point of behavior science, by the way, which is a US-based term, not widely used around the world. There is that convention, right? You need something measurable of behavior output. But the risk of that is that we actually forget, in our psychology discipline, how much introspection, plays a role, how much lived experience plays a role. And I think the belief lies in the person's view and their own self-reflection. I remember very clearly had a conversation with Lauren Canisius, who is a great psychologist, worked with executive functioning a lot, and we had a lot of discussion about diagnosing autism. And Lauren asked this question that, if you can diagnose depression based on a person's self-reported sadness, for a prolonged period of time, most of the day, for more than 2 weeks, why wouldn't that apply to neurodivergence? Right? I think it's challenging our perspectives about our understanding. And I think the nuance here is that many of the neurodivergents are historically linked to many medical conditions. And by definition, there's a historical convention of how things are designed. And that inevitably put into some potential disbelief of what the person's actual experiences are like.
I don't know if this is a question as much as it's a statement. We talk about this stuff, and we're all really open to it here. And we're like, yes, we have to welcome the neurodivergent student into the classroom and be more open. But do we have to break the machine? I mean, is the problem that the educational institutions that we work in and work within are not really open to neurodivergent students? And how do we actually implement this? How do we make practical and realistic changes so that everybody is involved? And it's really easy to work with the easy student. And everybody wants easy students in their class, and we take credit for the easy students. We're like, oh, they got an A in my class, but they're the easy students. And we give awards to the easy students. But how do we change it practically right now so that we are more welcoming of neurodivergent students?
Such a great point. I think it's really difficult to do it alone, right? So although in practical term that each of the faculty, each staff is actually working with students alone, but I think there needs to be some level of consensus that we're not working like ourselves. We need peers. So we need institutional support, which I see a lot from Canisius. That there is a group of people who are trying to work together towards the goal. So there's this possibility that we're not working alone as silos ourselves. And I agree with you. There are lots of constraints out there, and there will be constraints out there because this is essentially the mainstream thinking, right? So you need to be productive in this way, and then you have high GPA, and you get into the next stage, and so on and so forth. That's the mainstream out there, and I do really relate the difficulty of doing that by ourselves. So maybe the most practical thing I can think of is that not to do it alone. Like if you have a few people together and work together to find ways to support each other and be creative. Like what do you do and what do you do in this case, and then we figure out together. And the best case is that this actually has some kind of grassroots initiative and impact to the institutional level. So hopefully people like Fatima and others will be able to be synergistic at a certain level, at the higher level, to make it happen.
Sounds like a good innovation grant idea.
Other questions?
Thank you so much. I found this fascinating. I'm Nancy Wallace. I'm the Dean of the School of Education and Human Services, and I just am really struck with the thought that by the time students come to college, they already were very deserving of all these supports in their K-12 experience. And so, I see my counseling faculty here, but I don't see teacher education faculty here today. But how important this information is in preparing the next generation of teachers, so that they can use the universal design and they can really use some of the strategies that we know that are best practices with English language learners, for example. And so I think it will take time. There's no magic bullet, but over time I think we all need to do what's right for the students that are in front of us, starting early on. No questions. Yeah.
On behalf of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion and my colleagues in Academic Affairs, we are so grateful that you took time to be in community and to learn about the experiences of our students. I know there's always seems like there's something, right? And it's like, oh, I have all these things I have to do, and now this is something else I have to add to my knowledge base, to my toolkit, think about applying it, but our students are worth it. And so the fact that you were here today, I really appreciate it. Please take some time and fill out the evaluations on your tables, and we hope to see you at our next DEI workshop. Have a good day.